Hello and welcome, Exiles, to a crash course slash refresher on how to craft in Path of Exile 2. We're going to look at a basic idea of how to craft yourself a attack-based weapon, a spellcaster-based weapon, and a boot craft. I'm looking at these items specifically because they are some of the most important items on a character. Boots because movement speed, and weapons because damage. Now, the concepts I'm going to showcase you can use on other items, so bear with me. I don't want to overbloat with like 15 different examples. I just have 3 here today. Now, to start things off with, generally, most items can start out as some sort of magic base that already has something you want, or can be forced to be something you want using the perfect currencies. What do I mean by that? I have a base here that I bought that had good % fizz, and that's going to be our starting point for a physical based weapon. I bought a staff here that has good plus levels. That's going to be a nice starting point for a caster weapon. And I have a plain normal pair of boots, but it's with exceptional that has 2 sockets, which is very advantageous to craft from a scoured base all the way to a completed item. Now, the big elephant in the room here is with crafting, they took out the homogenizing exaltation omen. This thing was pretty much your critical resource to finish an item. It always allowed you to get that 5th or 6th affix done, and they're taking this away. It was pretty broken, but fear not, we can still make some really good items. So let's go ahead and give you some examples. To start with, physical based weapon. Really easy way to get this is you get a good base % weapon, and then you look at something like the Essence of Abrasion. This guarantees a very high flat tier of fizz. So from a starting point of good % fizz, I can force on good flat fizz. We're already up to a good weapon at that point. And then I can do follow-up things to force on, for example, prefix mods, a third prefix mod that is very good for damage. Like, for example, if you're playing a bear, which I'm going to be doing, so I'll be looking at a craft like this with a talisman where I'll say I want to force on gain damages extra. Now, the fun thing is when you come to PoE2 crafting, you can do a lot of very targeted uses of essences as well as annulment orbs, exaltations, and that's through resources such as Omen of Sinestral. And then they'll say something specific, like crystallization is referencing essences, exaltation is referencing exalts, necromancy is referencing the abyss currency, erasure is referencing a chaos orb, and annulment's referencing an annulment orb. Now these 4 over here are much more expensive, much more rare high-end currencies. I wouldn't recommend looking at using these too much unless you're really min-maxing, but the ones for necromancy, exalt, and essence are extremely useful, especially the essence one. For example, if I click the one that says, hey, you will only remove a suffix mod, all of a sudden my % fizz and my flat fizz is protected, which allows me to take this thing, which says it's going to add on a prefix mod, the gain fizz or the gain damage is extra, but I'm guaranteeing it won't remove either of my physical damage modifiers. So for example, right now, I now have an item that has good base damage and gain damage. That's 3 high DPS prefixes, but not only that, I can then force on some good suffixes. For example, if I were just to slam 2 suffixes here, this might not hit stuff I necessarily care about, but there are other perfect essences which can force on very powerful stats. The perfect essence of battle can force on +6. It's getting nerfed to +5. This is still incredibly useful, and you'd use this same dextral crystallization. It says remove only suffixes, and now all of a sudden I'm not hitting or removing any of my prefix mods, and I'm forcing on some good things to happen. For example, plus levels and onslaught, and then I could finish this item off with a preserved jawbone. Gives me a attack, basically not necessarily a guaranteed good affix, but it forces me or allows me the option to basically choose from 3 mods. So for example, if I were to slam an exalt and it hit a stat I didn't care about, well, that kind of sucks. But if I do a preserved jawbone for my last affix, I get to choose between 3 mods. Gonna go ahead and showcase this now with the Abyssal Crafting Station, the Well of Souls, which I guess I could just do this button to click to go there faster. And then not only do you get 3 options, you can use the Omen of Abyssal Echoes to get to choose twice. So I take this weapon, I reveal it, Maybe I don't care about any of these. Leech would maybe be pretty nice, but let's say we'll get that on a ring instead. So I'll re-roll and see if we can go again. And I don't know if these are too good. Maybe crit bonus is the best DPS option there. Point is, it gives you a lot more chances at getting that last Avix to be something decent. Not always going to hit, but in terms of investment, we took what was a pretty mediocre magic item and made it an item with a lot of base fizz damage, gain damage, plus levels, and onslaught generation. Similarly, we can do the same, a similar thing with a wand or staff, any plus level caster item, and then you can take the sorcery essences and then add a bunch of percent damage. These are getting notably buffed. The one that says 110 to 129% damage for staves is actually going to go all the way up to 180. So when I put this on here, it wouldn't just be 180, it'd be closer to 240% damage we just got from this point. And then onwards to finish the caster weapon, you don't have as many access points to good, basically essences. There's a lot of good weapon essences, but not so many on wands or staves. So you'd be a little bit more stuck at the point of just trying to basically blind slam from this point. Generally, if you had Omen of Homogenizing, you could start forcing on specific caster avixes. But the one bummer of playing a caster this coming league without homogenizing is your future affixes get a little less sure. Still very good to be able to force good percent damage with good plus levels, but your later steps, which are kind of like blind slams like this, aren't as likely to be something good. And of course, you can finish your last affix with a jawbone and attempt to then unveil a good plus level. So maybe you care about cast speed, maybe you're a low life lich, maybe you care about extra projectiles, like let's say you're playing Ember Fusillade or Fireball or something like that. This is just a reference point to show you some of your ideas. When it comes to a weapon, starting from a cheaper magic base with like plus levels, you can force on some percent damage, or starting with percent damage, you can force on some flat, force on some gain, and plus levels as well. Stuff like that is options you have available. Now, starting out about items from scratch, I would heavily suggest looking into perfect augments and perfect transmutes. These force mods to be at least item level 70. Essentially what that means is pretty much every time you use one of these, you're getting at least a T2, if not a T1 affix. So let me go ahead and showcase this real quick. If I were to then slam on augments, you'll notice that very regularly it is the highest possible tier. Now, cold res or resistances mods in general, these are required a level 82 item, which I do not have. And the res rolls, I believe, are level 70. So, for example, here, this is a T2 mod. However, it's a very good T2 mod. Getting a T2 resistance roll is very good. There's not very many level 82 items, and getting level 82 bases that are exceptional with +2 sockets or 2 base sockets is very expensive to begin with. So something like this I would consider very good. And then we'd be fishing around for things like flat ES or flat life is what we'd be looking for. You know, some starter base stats that would be nice is what we're going to be generally fishing for. Movement speed's good as well. I don't want to start with movement speed because we can force that on later with Hysteria. So we'll kind of fish around a little bit more. And keep in mind that, yes, right now, annulments are very expensive in the current like progression of the league with how inflated the economy is, but early on they're a lot less let's say sought after or expensive. So we have flat ES, flat int. This is a pretty good start point. The next thing I'd recommend looking into, following up, this can work for a lot of magic bases, whether they're boots, gloves, body armor, helmet. A lot of these base types, you have 2 good affixes. You can follow up with a guaranteed resistance roll like this, for example. So let's say we put on something like a resistance. Then I can follow that up with a, let's say I want to force on a suffix with the preserved rib. This giving me 3 suffixes is actually pretty useful in this point, because what I'm thinking about doing is I'm thinking about forcing on movement speed, then forcing on socketed effect later. And so the idea here is I would take the crystallized suffix guarantee, go for Hysteria Essence, which gives me a 1 in 3 chance to remove that desecrated suffix I just added to put on movement speed, but still guaranteed a good affix on my suffix pool. So I'm going to do that. It did not remove the desecrated affix, but that's how I forced on the movement speed. Essence of Hysteria and Horror are backbones for making good boots currently, and so you're going to want to look for those two resources a lot of time. And then to follow this up, I will consider doing another dextral crystallization where I'm going to attempt to remove that desecrated affix again, 50-50 on the horror, so that way we can maybe go for another desecrated again on that suffix pool. I'm just going to try one more time. Lost the 50-50. It is what it is, but you have multiple situations where you could keep some of those good suffixes while removing the desecrated mod. The reason we'd want to lose the desecrated mod is because it costs us almost nothing to guarantee putting that back on. Now, we lost the 1 and 3, we lost the 1 and 5, or the 1 and 2 afterwards. We're going to just have to follow up with something like a blind exalt for a suffix and a prefix. This is something where if we had homogenizing, for example, this right here, I could say I want to exalt a prefix and I want to use a perfect, and I could force it to give me back a defensive roll. However, homogenizing is not going to exist, and so you're going to be looking more towards blind slamming in these sorts of states, which doesn't necessarily guarantee you good mods. Now, if I was carrying about an Archmage build, that high tier mana would be pretty solid, but, or I don't even know if it's high tier. Mana actually rolls pretty high. Okay, it's tier 3. It's okay in terms of mana. But the 5th and 6th mod with the new age of no homogenizing gets a little bit weaker in terms of forcing on affixes, but that's the sort of approach you're going to be taking. You're going to be taking magic bases that start out with, you know, 1 or 2 good mods. Then you're going to go through the process of essence up a targeted mod you care about, force on a couple other targeted mods, and then there's going to be some level of gamble to can you preserve some of the good affixes to see whether or not your item ends up being a 3 or 4 stat item or a 5 or 6 stack item in terms of like 5 or 6 ideal stats versus 3 or 4 ideal stats with a couple other stats that aren't as ideal. Hopefully I'm making some level of sense of what you have in terms of tools to craft. I'm just going to take res there. That's pretty solid. So res, ES, movement speed, mana, plus socket effect. That's decent for like an Archmage build. For a build that would just want ES, you wouldn't necessarily maybe want the mana per se, or, you know, the freeze duration isn't really an ideal affix. You want to be basically just have some immunity to freeze or have some way to deal with it rather than have reduced freeze duration on your boots, for example. Anyways, hopefully that gives you a crash course on some of the basic crafting materials you have available, some ideas of forcing out some pretty decent weapons from a magic point. Same with normal items. So keep your eyes peeled for good bases in terms of magic bases that have 1 or 2 ideal stats and crafting outward from there. Although, you know, the boots didn't turn out great in terms of we got mana plus reduced freeze duration, you have a decent chance throughout that crafting process where if I remove that desecrated affix, the likelihood I end up with 3 good suffixes basically is almost guaranteed versus where we didn't correctly remove the desecrated affix, it still has a chance to succeed on the blind exalt afterwards. You're setting yourself up, for example, if I started with a good magic base, you're looking at 30 to 40% odds that you're going to end up with 5 good stats, that sort of thing. That's the idea. So there's still some pretty targetable crafts in terms of like you're pretty highly likely to succeed. So don't lose hope. Them removing homogenizing, although it will suck in terms of finishing some of those final affixes, it is still incredibly strong to craft without it. Anyways, just a little short refresher course on some of the crafting currencies you have available in terms of omens and essences. And there will be some other options with recombinators and stuff. I'm sure when it gets into the live patch, I'll be testing around with very specific crafts for whatever build I'm working on, and I'll probably make some step-by-step videos on how to craft X or Y item that is pretty ideal for the build I'm working on, that sort of thing. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoy it. As always, appreciate you guys. Take care. Have a good one.